He survived the battlefield, but nearly lost the war within himself. If David's journey touched you, subscribing to BetterStory is the best way to keep these voices alive. David grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where opportunity was scarce, but dreams were abundant. His father worked long shifts at a factory, hands calloused and tired, while his mother juggled small jobs to keep food on the table. Money was tight, but the house was filled with discipline, faith, and the belief that hard work could open doors. From a young age, David carried responsibilities beyond his years. He helped his younger siblings with homework, ran errands for his parents, and learned the quiet dignity of sacrifice. Yet behind the weight of daily struggles he carried something else, a burning desire to be more. He wanted to step out of the narrow streets of his childhood and prove himself worthy in a world that often overlooked boys like him. High school was both a refuge and a reminder of reality. Teachers noticed his determination, but many classmates gave in to despair, settling for a future limited by circumstance. David refused. He joined local sports, pushed his grades higher, and kept his eyes fixed on the horizon. Still, he knew that to truly change his destiny, he needed a path greater than what Chicago could offer. That path revealed itself in the form of military service. Recruiters spoke of honor, travel, education, and a chance to carve out a new life. To David, it sounded like a way forward, an escape from poverty, a way to help his family, and a chance to prove himself on a stage bigger than the streets he grew up in. At 19, with his parents watching proudly and nervously from the doorway, David packed his few belongings into a small bag. The boy who had grown up in the shadow of hardship was now stepping into the unknown, convinced that service would turn him into the man he always dreamed of becoming. When David first put on the uniform, it felt like slipping into a new skin. The fabric was rough, the boots heavy, but to him it carried a sense of pride he had never felt before. Standing in line during training, shoulder to shoulder with men from across the country, he no longer felt like just a boy from Chicago. He felt part of something larger, an unbreakable brotherhood bound by duty and sacrifice. The early months of training were brutal. Dawn runs that left his lungs burning, endless drills that tested both body and mind, and instructors whose voices cut through the air like gunfire. Yet, David welcomed the hardship. Every bead of sweat, every aching muscle reminded him that he was moving forward, leaving behind the weight of poverty and uncertainty. For the first time, he felt in control of his own destiny. Among his fellow recruits, friendships blossomed quickly. They joked in the barracks, shared letters from home, and carried one another through exhaustion. These bonds gave David strength, and he began to understand that survival was never about the strongest individual, but about the collective will of those who refused to give up. Still, beneath the pride and camaraderie, there was a quiet sense of fear. David had heard whispers of what awaited them after training, stories of battlefields where nothing was certain, where a man's courage could be tested in ways no drill could prepare him for. He carried that fear silently, pushing it down with the belief that his uniform gave him purpose. On the day of his graduation, David stood tall as the flag rippled in the wind above him. His parents had travelled miles to see him march across the parade ground, his mother's eyes glistening with tears, his father's face stern but proud. In that moment, David was no longer the boy chasing escape. He was a soldier, ready to step into the unknown, convinced that honour and duty would guide his steps. What he didn't know was that the greatest battles were not just ahead of him. They would one day follow him home. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of rotors chopping above signalled that David's world was about to change forever. When his boots first touched foreign soil, he felt the ground tremble with distant echoes of conflict. It wasn't the training fields anymore. This was war, and everything around him screamed of it. The heat clung to his skin like a second uniform, dust rising with every step, carrying the scent of oil, sweat, and something else. Something heavier. The first sight that struck him wasn't the battlefield itself, but the faces of the soldiers already stationed there. Eyes that looked far older than their years, voices calm but edged with exhaustion, movements sharp and mechanical as if every action carried the weight of survival. David's first mission came sooner than expected. He and his unit were ordered to patrol areas where tension never slept. Every crack of a branch, every shadow in the trees, every sudden silence set his heart pounding. Training had taught him how to react, but nothing prepared him for the constant uncertainty, the invisible line between life and death. The first firefight left him shaken to his core. Bullets cut through the air with a sound he would never forget, explosions tearing through the silence like thunder. He remembered pressing his body against the dirt, heart hammering, hands trembling as he tried to return fire. In those moments, courage didn't feel like bravery, it felt like survival, the refusal to give in to fear even as it consumed him. What haunted him most wasn't the chaos of combat, but the aftermath. The quiet that followed was louder than gunfire. He helped carry wounded men back to safety, their blood soaking his hands, their voices fading with desperate pleas. Some survived, others didn't. That night, lying awake under a foreign sky, David realized he had crossed an invisible threshold. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a witness to war's cruel truth. And in the stillness of the night, he whispered to himself, "I have to make it home." War had a way of stripping men down to their core. Out there, in the mud and the heat, no one cared where you came from or what your life had been before. What mattered was the man next to you, the one who shared his last sip of water, the one who covered your back when bullets flew, the one who whispered jokes in the dark just to make you smile when fear threatened to break you. For David, these bonds became his anchor. Nights were long, filled with distant echoes of gunfire, but within the circle of his brothers in arms, there was a fragile sense of safety. They told stories about home, about girlfriends waiting, about dreams of opening shops, about families they longed to return to. Those stories kept them human, reminders that beyond the battlefield, life was still worth fighting for. There was Johnson, the jokester who always managed to lighten the mood, even when exhaustion weighed heavy. There was Miller, quiet and thoughtful, who carried a worn Bible in his pocket and read aloud passages by candlelight. And there was Ramirez, who swore he would one day open a garage and teach kids how to fix cars, believing that hope was built in small, practical dreams. David found himself holding on to these men as if they were his family. In the middle of chaos, their laughter was a shield, their words a balm. When one faltered, the others lifted him up. When one cried, the others looked away respectfully, pretending not to notice, because dignity was the only gift they could give each other. But brotherhood also came with heartbreak. The day one of them didn't return from patrol, the weight of silence crushed them all. They buried their grief quickly, because the war left no room for mourning. Yet inside, each of them carried scars deeper than any wound, a reminder of how fragile their world was, and how precious every moment of connection could be. For David, it was this brotherhood that gave him strength. It wasn't medals or orders that kept him moving forward. It was the unspoken promise to the men beside him. We go home together, or not at all. War left its marks in ways that could not always be seen. For David, the wounds weren't on his body. They lived inside his mind, hidden but heavy. At first he thought he could shake them off, that time would blunt the edges of fear. But the images refused to fade. He remembered the sound of bullets tearing through the night, the metallic scent of blood mixed with dirt, the desperate cries of men calling for their mothers with fading breaths. He remembered the silence afterward, that crushing emptiness when the chaos ended and only absence remained. Those memories clung to him, sharper than any blade. Sleep became dangerous. The moment David closed his eyes, the past returned, faces of friends he couldn't save, moments when survival felt like betrayal. He woke drenched in sweat, his heart racing, the echoes of phantom screams still ringing in his ears. He tried to laugh it off during the day, but his hands trembled when he least expected it, and sudden noises sent jolts of panic through his chest. There was no name for it then, no easy explanation. The world around him expected soldiers to come home unbroken, to leave the battlefield behind as if flipping a switch. But David knew better. His war was no longer outside, it lived within him. He began to notice how his smile came less often, how his voice carried a weight it never had before. The boy from Chicago, once full of hope, had become a man aged beyond his years. He didn't speak of it, not to his brothers in arms, not in letters home. Instead, he carried it quietly, believing silence was the only way to endure. What David didn't yet realize was that these invisible wounds would follow him long after he left the battlefield. They would shape the course of his life, testing him in ways he could never imagine. When David finally stepped off the bus in Chicago, the cold wind that swept through the city streets felt like a cleansing breath. He had survived. The uniform clung to him like a second skin, but in his heart he carried the hope of shedding it and starting fresh. Friends and neighbors shook his hand, his family embraced him tightly, and for a brief moment, David believed he was stepping into a brighter future. He imagined rebuilding his life with steady work, maybe buying a small house one day, perhaps even starting a family. The city seemed full of possibility. The familiar sound of traffic, the towering buildings, the smell of food from street vendors, all of it felt alive, promising. For the first time in years, he let himself dream of normalcy. David walked the streets with a quiet pride, certain that his service meant something, that it would open doors for him. After all, he had given his youth, his strength, and nearly his life. Surely, his country would give him a chance to begin again. He told himself the nights would get easier, the memories would soften, and the rhythm of ordinary days would replace the chaos he left behind. Family dinners were filled with laughter and cautious questions about his time away. David answered lightly, brushing over the darker truths. He didn't want to burden them. He wanted to believe in this new chapter. His siblings looked at him like a hero, his parents with pride, and for a short while he allowed himself to believe that maybe he truly was. But beneath the hope, cracks were already forming. The world outside his family's embrace did not always see him as he saw himself. The streets of Chicago had changed during the years he was gone. Opportunities were harder to grasp than he expected, and society, busy moving forward, wasn't always ready to make space for men who had returned carrying invisible burdens. Still, in those first few weeks, David clung tightly to hope. He whispered to himself at night, "This is my second chance." What he didn't yet know was how quickly that hope would be tested. At first, David thought the hardest part was over. He was home, surrounded by the familiar skyline of Chicago, yet as the weeks passed, a different kind of battle began. It wasn't the noise of war that haunted him now. It was the silence. In the city he had grown up in, he suddenly felt like a stranger. The friends who once shared his boyhood dreams now talked about careers, families, and plans for the future. They asked him polite questions about his service, then quickly changed the subject, uneasy with the answers they might hear. Their lives had moved forward. His had been frozen in a place no one wanted to talk about. The streets, the laughter of children, even the rhythm of the trains that once felt comforting, all of it seemed distant, like echoes from a life that no longer belonged to him. David would walk past crowds of people and feel utterly invisible. He had given years of his youth to something bigger than himself, but here at home, it felt like no one noticed, or worse, like no one cared. Nights grew heavier. He would sit by his bedroom window, staring out at the flickering lights of the city, wondering how he could feel so alone in a place filled with millions of people. Conversations with his family grew shorter. He didn't know how to explain the emptiness inside him, and they didn't know how to ask. What hurt most was the distance. Not the miles between battlefields and Chicago, but the miles that had grown between him and the world he once belonged to. The boy who had left this city with dreams of proving himself was back, but he was no longer the same. And as much as he wanted to believe otherwise, he feared that maybe he never would be. David believed that work would be his way back into the rhythm of life. A steady job, a daily routine, something to remind him he was still useful. That was all he wanted. With his uniform carefully folded away, he dressed in his best shirt, polished his shoes, and began knocking on doors across the city. Factories, offices, construction sites. Everywhere he went, he carried himself with the discipline of a soldier and the hope of a man ready to start again. He spoke of his service with quiet pride, certain it would mean something. But more often than not, the interviews ended with the same polite smile, the same empty words, "We'll be in touch." Weeks went by, and no one called. At first, he brushed it off. He told himself it just took time. But as rejection piled up, doubt crept in. His savings dwindled, his days stretched into long walks between job postings, and each no felt heavier than the last. The skills that had kept him alive overseas seemed to mean nothing here. Employers looked past him, uninterested in the discipline, resilience, or leadership forged in hardship. The hardest part wasn't just the lack of work, it was the feeling of being unwanted. David had faced fear on the battlefield, but this was a different kind of fight, one against invisibility. He wondered if his sacrifice had mattered at all, if the city he had defended from afar now had no place for him within its walls. Each evening he returned home tired but restless, his hands empty, his spirit a little dimmer. He tried to smile for his family, to keep their faith alive, but in the quiet of his room doubt echoed louder than any gunfire. The war had tested his body. This silence, this rejection, was now testing his soul. There is a silence that cuts deeper than any sound of battle, the silence of being unseen. For David, the city he once called home now felt like a place where he walked unnoticed, as though he had returned from a war no one remembered. Crowds moved past him on the streets, busy with lives that seemed untouched by the chaos he had survived. He tried to join conversations at gatherings, to reconnect with old friends, but there was always a gap, an invisible wall. People spoke of promotions, vacations, marriages. David nodded, smiled when he could, but inside he felt like a shadow lingering at the edge of their light. No one asked about his sleepless nights, or the discipline carved into his bones. No one seemed to want to know. What struck him hardest was how invisible sacrifice could become once the uniform came off. The same country that had demanded his courage now offered him no guidance, no path forward. He was left drifting between two worlds, no longer a soldier, but not yet fully part of civilian life. There were days when he sat for hours in his small apartment, staring at the walls, wondering if he had already lived the most important part of his life. His medals, tucked in a box under the bed, felt more like relics than proof of worth. In the battlefield, he had been part of something larger, bound by brotherhood and purpose. Back here, he was just another face in the crowd, and sometimes not even that. For David, invisibility became its own kind of prison, a place where his voice carried no weight, where his presence stirred no notice, where the meaning of his struggle blurred into silence. The nights were the hardest. David would lie awake, his mind replaying fragments of memories, faces of comrades, sudden bursts of sound, the endless horizon of foreign skies. When dawn broke, instead of relief, there was only exhaustion. Each day felt like a repetition of the last, a circle with no exit. Without work, without direction, the hours stretched endlessly. He would walk the streets of Chicago, watching construction sites, offices, and shops filled with people who seemed to know exactly where they belonged. For him, every rejection letter, every polite dismissal after an interview was a reminder that the skills that had kept him alive in war meant little here. Some nights he sat with a bottle in his hand, staring at it as though it held answers. The temptation to drown his silence grew stronger, not out of desire for drink, but out of the desperate need to numb the weight pressing on his chest. He had fought for survival once, but now he found himself fighting against the emptiness inside. Friends began to drift away, unsure of how to handle his quiet, his restlessness. Family, though well-meaning, could not bridge the gap between their lives and his. To them, he had returned. To him, part of him had never left. At times, David wondered if he had already lost the war, not the one overseas, but the one within himself. He questioned whether his life carried meaning anymore, or if he was destined to fade into obscurity, a forgotten soldier in a city too busy to notice. The walls of his small apartment seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. The medals under his bed did not speak. The silence pressed harder, and David felt himself sinking, slowly, into a place where hope was almost out of reach. One evening, David found himself sitting at a small community centre, almost by accident. A flyer had caught his eye earlier that week. Veterans Support Gathering, Share Your Story. He hesitated at the door, his instinct telling him to turn away. But something inside, perhaps the quiet ache of loneliness, pushed him in. Inside, the room was plain, just a circle of chairs and a coffee pot humming in the corner. At first, David stayed silent, arms crossed, listening to others speak. They told fragments of their journeys, jobs lost, families broken, sleepless nights. As he listened, a strange thing happened. The silence inside him began to shift. These were his struggles, mirrored in their voices. When it was finally his turn, David's words came slowly, halting at first. He spoke of the battlefield, of the emptiness of returning home, of the crushing weight of rejection letters. His voice trembled, but he kept speaking. By the time he finished, the room was silent, not out of judgment, but out of recognition. Heads nodded, eyes glistened. For the first time in years, David felt understood. That night, he walked home lighter. Something had shifted. His story, once a burden, became a bridge. The more he shared, the more he realized that his pain had meaning, not only for him, but for others who needed to hear it. Slowly, opportunities followed. A local school invited him to speak, then a youth program. Each time, his voice grew stronger. He was no longer just a man haunted by the past. He was a storyteller, a guide. His words carried the weight of survival, resilience, and hard-won truth. David began to see what had been invisible before, that his life still had purpose. Not in hiding his scars, but in showing them, so that others could see they were not alone. What began as hesitant words in a small community room soon grew into something larger than David had ever imagined. The first invitations were modest: church basements, high school gyms, veteran halls with a handful of listeners. Yet every time he spoke, more people wanted to hear. His story resonated not because it was polished, but because it was raw, real, and unfiltered. Soon, larger venues began to call. Universities asked him to address students about resilience and reintegration. Non-profit organizations invited him to speak at conferences. Each time he stood before a crowd, he carried with him not just his own voice, but the voices of countless veterans who had never found the strength to share. Standing on a stage for the first time, lights hot on his face, David felt the same nerves he once felt before battle. But when he looked out at the audience, faces young and old, expectant and listening, he understood something profound. His pain had been transformed into purpose. The war within him, the endless nights of silence, had been reshaped into words that gave others strength. People approached him afterward, some with tears, others with gratitude. Parents thanked him for giving them a window into what their sons and daughters endured. Young men who felt lost said his words gave them hope. Veterans clasped his hand tightly, whispering, "You said what I could never say." With every speech, David found himself healing too. Each story he told lessened the weight he carried, turning wounds into lessons. He realized he was no longer defined by rejection or despair. He was now defined by the lives he touched. David was no longer invisible. His voice echoed in classrooms, auditoriums, and community centers. And in that echo, he found belonging. As the years passed, David's story became more than just his own. His voice had planted seeds that grew into movements, initiatives, and lives reshaped by the power of resilience. Former students he once spoke to returned years later, telling him how his words guided them through their own struggles. Veterans who had remained silent for decades began to open up, some writing their own memoirs, others simply finding peace in conversations with their families. David never sought fame, yet his presence became a symbol. To many, he represented the possibility of transformation, that brokenness did not have to be the end, but could be the foundation for something greater. His speeches were recorded, shared, and replayed in classrooms and community halls across the country. His message outlived the walls of any single auditorium. In time, mentorship became his greatest pride. He took young people under his wing, not just veterans, but anyone who felt lost or unseen. He showed them that scars, whether physical or invisible, could become sources of strength. He reminded them that survival was not enough. True victory came from building a life worth living. Even as his hair turned grey and his steps slowed, David's fire never dimmed. He was not just telling his story anymore. He was passing it on, ensuring that future generations would carry it forward. His legacy was not carved in stone or written in medals. It lived in the voices of those he had touched, in the courage of those who dared to speak because he had spoken first. David had once feared fading into obscurity, but instead he had become a light, a beacon for those still lost in the dark. In his later years, David no longer rushed from stage to stage. The invitations still came, but he chose carefully, preferring smaller, more intimate gatherings where he could sit face to face with those who needed his words most. He had learned that true impact was not measured by the size of the crowd, but by the depth of the connection. His days grew quieter, yet filled with meaning. He often sat on his porch in Chicago, watching children ride their bikes past, neighbors waving as they passed by. Once he had felt invisible in this very city. Now he was known, respected, and embraced. The same streets that had once echoed with his loneliness now carried the warmth of belonging. David kept a stack of letters on his desk, thank you notes from students, veterans, and families. Some were short, just a line of gratitude. Others were long, heartfelt stories of how his speeches helped them through their darkest moments. Whenever doubt crept in, he would read those words, reminders that his journey had mattered. At night, the silence that had once tormented him felt different. The echoes of war still stirred in his dreams, but they no longer ruled him. Instead, they had become part of a larger story, one he had faced, shared, and transformed into something that gave others hope. Though his body aged, his spirit seemed lighter. He no longer carried the burden alone. His community, his listeners, his students, they all carried it with him. And in that shared weight, he found peace. For David, the final chapter of his life was not about forgetting the past, but about living fully in the present, surrounded by the voices and faces that once felt so far away. As David's life drew to its quiet close, he no longer feared being forgotten. The man who once wandered through Chicago's streets unseen had become a figure remembered not for his struggles alone, but for the way he transformed them into strength. His story had begun in hardship, marked by battles both abroad and within, but it ended in peace, surrounded by the legacy he had built. In his final years, he was often visited by former students, veterans, and neighbors. They came not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. They told him of new paths they had found, families they had rebuilt, communities they had strengthened, all sparked by the words he once shared. David would listen quietly, smiling, knowing that his voice lived on through theirs. The garage-like halls where he first told his story, the school auditoriums that echoed with his words, and the countless conversations whispered over coffee had become his monuments. He did not need statues or ceremonies. His legacy was alive, breathing in every person he touched. When he passed, those who knew him carried forward more than just memories. They carried a reminder that silence could be broken, that despair could be reshaped into hope, and that even the most wounded lives could inspire healing. David's journey had been one of survival, but more than that, it had been one of transformation. His final chapter was not an ending, but a continuation, written into the hearts of those who would never forget. And so, though the man is gone, the message remains. Even in the darkest places, the human spirit can rise, speak, and light the way for others. David's journey reminds us that battles do not always end when soldiers return home. For him, the true war began in the silence of his small apartment, in the rejection letters that piled up, and in the hollow nights where hope felt unreachable. Yet through the act of speaking, first in hesitant whispers, then in powerful addresses, he discovered that his scars could carry meaning. What makes David's story unforgettable is not the weight of his suffering, but the way he transformed it. He turned isolation into connection, despair into resilience, and silence into a voice that touched thousands. In classrooms, auditoriums, and community halls, his words lit sparks in people who believed they were alone, and those sparks grew into something larger than himself, a legacy of healing, courage, and perseverance. Even in his final years, David showed us that legacy is not measured in monuments or medals, but in lives changed. His story lives on not because he avoided hardship, but because he confronted it with honesty and passed on the lessons he learned. For every viewer listening now, David's life offers a truth that transcends one man's journey, that we all carry battles, but within those battles lies the power to inspire others. His voice may have fallen silent, but the echoes remain, reminding us that transformation is always possible, and that even brokenness can become a gift to the world. If David's journey touched you, subscribing to BetterStory is the best way to keep these voices alive.